Ladies and gentlemen, we recorded the episode of Power Plays and Paydays that you're about to watch a few days early this time in order to fit in with our guest Bheki's schedule with him traveling back to Los Angeles. Lo and behold, since then, a couple of major things have taken place. So just before you watch the episode, I wanted to give you a quick update. Firstly, our MPC did not cut interest rates, as we predicted. Also, we spoke about John Steenhuisen and some of the internal wranglings that are taking place within the Democratic Alliance. Well, John has now come out to say that he will not be contesting for the leadership at their upcoming leadership conference. What does that mean? Well, in all likelihood, Gordon Hill Lewis seems to be the front runner to take over that spot as leader of the DA. And that could have some implications for our GNU, which we will unpack in future episodes of Power Plays and Paydays. So we hope you enjoy the episode. Keep in mind what I've just said, and we look forward to interacting further in the future. Thanks then. Bheki Mahlobo, welcome to Power Plays and Paydays here on EBnet.Stream. This is our first episode for 2026. I feel like I haven't seen you in ages. How was your Christmas and New Year, Bheki?
Hi, Leon. It's great to be on your show in this new year, and compliments to you and your viewers. It's been amazing to see the people that are closest to me and are most important to me, my family as well as my partner. And when I go to the United States, which will be this Saturday, I'm often gone for about 4 to 6 months, and what I do is just video calls, and that's not the same as actually being in the country. So I'm actually grateful to be back here at home, grateful to spend some time with my partner as well as my mother, my sisters, aunts, nephews, and everyone, and also my colleagues here at the Common Sense.
Well, we wish you all the best, and to your family and everyone at the Common Sense and France Trenier private clients. We wish you the very best for this year. And isn't it? So I've been picking up in all the different interactions I've been having. There's a sense of optimism for some reason that everyone's smiling. Now, I don't know if it was just the holidays or whether it was some of the good economic news and the strong markets that we've been experiencing. But how are you seeing things at the moment? Where are we sitting economically going into this year?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to start off the show there, Leon. If we look at South Africa's economic growth for 2025, the projections range between 1.2 to 1.4%. Now, that's roughly about 50% better than how the economy was in 2024, which is definitely a good thing and it's a good trend. But it's not enough when you look at the absorption of the number of people employed in the country. A 1.2% economic growth rate for the year of 2025 is not enough to absorb the huge pool of South Africans that are economically excluded. However, it is good. And what fundamentally underpins that growth rate has been the rate cuts that we've been seeing from the South African Reserve Bank, which has been filtering towards the later half of last year, as well as the performance of agriculture in South Africa. However, when it comes to actual policy that will drive that number eclipsing 2% and approaching where it should be at about 4 to 5%, those policies are not in place to actually lift the confidence that underpins the investment number to where it needs to be. South Africa trails about 10 percentage points behind that of emerging markets, which has led to an economy that's now looking at a GDP growth rate of about 1%. And that's quite important. If we look at GDP per capita, which is the size of the South African economy divided by its population, even with that improved growth outlook, current GDP per capita in the country is lower than what it was in 2008. And what that means is that your quality of life as an ordinary South African is actually fares worse than what you saw in 2008. The trends, though, is that we're not an economy that grows sub 1%, but we're just slightly eclipsing 1%, but still not enough to actually solve the deep issues such as that of higher unemployment in the country.
Do you know offhand what our ranking is across the world in terms of GDP per capita, where we sort of stack up versus everyone else?
I do not know that off by head, but what I do know as in terms of that is South Africa's contribution to global GDP, which is about a fraction of a percentage point, it's about 0.6%. And other countries as well that had similar living conditions as South Africa, such as that of Poland, for example, have eclipsed South Africa's GDP performance if you look at over the past 30 years. We were actually ahead of those countries at one point in time in the early 2000s. And now, because we've been an economy that's stagnated over the past 17 years, we've fallen behind those emerging market economies.
Yeah, what's important is that our GDP per capita has reduced significantly over time to where we are today. So there's catch up that needs to be played. The positive economic news is not sufficient to get us to the levels to deal with the call it the big issues that we're facing. But we do have a potential rate cut coming this week. Do you agree with that?
So that's actually also a good point as well, looking at South Africa's interest rate outlook. And what fundamentally underpins South Africa's direction of rate cuts has to do with what will be done with the US Fed today, this evening. I think the US Fed holds today. And usually the trend, if you were to pull a chart looking at South Africa's interest rate compared to that of its global peers, South Africa always maintains its interest rates above that of its global peers, such as that of the US. And the reason why it does this is to protect the rand, which has been rallying quite strongly quite recently. I mean, it's like ripped about 80 cents against the dollar over the past 2 weeks, and that's off the base of a weaker dollar. Coming to what I expect tomorrow, I actually expect that the SARB, although you're seeing this appreciation in the currency, is that of a hold still at present. And that's largely because of the announcement of the 3% inflation target that was announced towards the end of last year. I think this is a new target that's been established in the South Africa. And the precaution that Lesetja Kganyago may want to say to investors that we want to be credible with this inflation target. South Africa's inflation, as of December of last year, marginally increased about 3.6% from 3.5%. That's towards the upper end of the target band of this new inflation target of roughly 2 to 4%, not roughly, about 2 to 4%. So in order to establish credibility, you might actually hold for now and actually propose a 25 basis point cut in March. But I do think that the country will definitely see rate cuts this year. Our call is about 50 basis points of rate cuts, which would take South Africa's interest rates from where they currently stand at about 6.75% to about 6.25%.
This might be a very unfair question, and I think also to be fair to the viewers, by the time they view this, it'll be past the time of the rates, the MC meeting, and so on. So they'll be able to judge whether you're right or not. But how much politics do you think comes into this? I mean, we've got elections coming up later in the year. Is there a reason to perhaps delay the rate cuts to make it more fresh in everyone's minds?
Well, I think that's what's currently happening right now is that South Africa's domestic affairs is actually not at the moment having a great impact on the direction of the currency and out of that monetary policy. Actually, what's going on present, it's external factors that has led to a strong rand. Some of it is domestic, and I'll touch on that as well. But the most important thing to note here, which is going to be important to look at South Africa's interest rate outlook, is what has been happening with the dollar. When Mr. Trump won his presidential election in November of 2024, the dollar measured as the DXY was about 17% expensive compared to its 20-year historical average. It has now depreciated about 11%. And if you read the Common Sense this morning, the front page, one of the featured articles is me mentioning that at that time, which was about last week and in December as well, is that the dollar had room to further depreciate, which is exactly what has happened, leading to the currency to now trade at its strongest level since June 2022. And those factors have contributed to an environment where now the SARB can continue to cut interest rates. So in the short term, it has very much been external factors. And into the long term, I think South Africa's domestic issues, particularly that of local elections as well as that of the national elections in 2029, will definitely have a greater impact on the direction of the currency. However, at present, much of the rand's strength has been that of dollar weakness, but also importantly as well as that of the formation of the GNU, which has sort of eased investor tension when looking at South Africa's risk profile from investors. That has actually been to the benefit of the country. And out of this GNU, South Africa has moved from grey listing, as well as other benefits in terms of fiscal and monetary prudence.
We really are in a spot at the moment of being on the scales. There's these positive aspects and these negative aspects the whole time. So the what is your view on the rand? Do you think it's going to stay strong, continue with the dollar weakness? And what's the impact on the dollar should, and it seems likely, that America end up in a war with Iran?
Well, this direction of the rand was expected by us at the Common Sense. In fact, in December of last year, we put out a piece. I actually said that the rand will test the 16 rand level against the dollar. And what I expect right now is that given that the dollar is still about 6 percentage points above its 20-year historical average, suggesting that there's further room for weakness, the rand could actually even breach 15.50 against the dollar and even reach 15.20, where I think that would be at its fair value. And if you see these events, these positive, if the local government elections as well as the national government elections lead to that of the unity government remaining intact and for South Africa to actually implement the policies that would see GDP growth be that of a 3% and approaching that of 5%, you'd easily see a rand trading at about 12 to 13 against the dollar. So currently, the outlook that I see is the rand trading about in the ranges of 15.20 to 15.50 throughout the course of this year. And that's off the back of expectations of further rate cuts in the US, as well as a broader weakness in the dollar.
EBnet is proud to bring you top quality content from experts across the financial services industry in South Africa and internationally, for free. Your support helps us in doing this. All we ask is that you subscribe to our channels by clicking the subscribe button below. Share this video with others you think will benefit from it, and give us thumbs up if you are enjoying the content. That way, you help us help you. Thank you from the team at EBnet. For more great content, please visit www.ebnet.co.za.
I was brought up in a world of only rand weakness. I struggle to believe you. I must be honest. To me, the rand always weakens. You can set your clock by it, kind of thing. So this is very new rhetoric that I'm hearing.
Well, we've been actually calling the rand publicly over the past 2 years. The first time that we saw the rand strengthening below 17, this is actually on business day as well, about 2 years ago. Oh, I think this was actually, no, this was not 2 years ago. This was March of 2024. And the reasoning behind that is that we saw that there will be a formation of a government of national unity between that of the ANC and DA, which would be favored better by investors, as well as that of those external factors that I mentioned to you. So calling the rand, we've actually been on this call for the past year or 2 years or so. And it's because of those fundamentals driving the currency strengthening. And we still see those at play throughout this year as well.
Okay. So is there anything else that you can add in terms of the domestic economy before we start just linking into this positive, call it almost short-term news relative to this bigger picture of achieving the growth levels that we need? And that's where we need to bring the US into the discussion in the geopolitical sort of world.
Yeah, the thing to add there is that if you want to have a forecast gauge in terms of South Africa's long-term economic prospects, what you look at actually is confidence. And what you saw into that of the final quarter of last year, you saw a modest lift in business and consumer confidence, and that's off the back of lower input costs as well as cutting of interest rate by the South African Reserve Bank. However, business and consumer confidence remains about half of what it was in 2008, meaning that South Africa's fixed investment number, which is the dial on GDP growth in the country, remains where it has been over the past decade at about 15% as a proportion of GDP. So the long-term prospects is that you're still going to be an economy that eclipses 1% economic growth, but you will struggle to see an economy that goes towards that 3% target and towards that of the 5% target. So long-term wise, we're still going to be an economy that grows at about 1%. But in terms of 2026, you're going to see those modest lifts in economic performance. But that's not because that's underpinned by a policy direction or green shoots by the government. It's largely due to that of rate cuts and external factors, which are now in favor of South Africa's short-term economic prospects.
So if we look at the policy side of it, and correct me where I go wrong here, we've got a GNU But from a foreign policy perspective, that's largely been driven by the sort of the ANC elements within that. That has become quite hostile towards the US. Yet the US we need in order to grow fixed investment and to achieve those sort of growth levels. And a lot of the hostility with the US also is around relationships with the likes of Iran and so on. We were holding naval exercises. I don't know if Iran was there or not. It depends on who you speak to, along with China, Russia, and so on. So there really does seem to be big concern in that respect. Has anything shifted, or is the GNU starting to actually play more of a role in terms of shaping the foreign relations, and how might that also change over time as we move towards the municipal elections and the politicians start grappling for popularity?
Our view of the South African government in terms of its foreign policy is that it will continue in this activist kind of approach with the Americans. They have actually not been talking with Americans in order to attract an investment deal to lift that fixed investment number. So currently, we continue to see those trade relations continue to deteriorate in South Africa to continue to face its high tariff level. And the most important thing to mention there, Leon, is that what we're seeing in how the Americans are dealing with the tariffs is actually these are not tariffs that are put in place and they're permanent for every country. They're actually used as a negotiation tactic. And that's why fundamentally the global economy and the economic outlook of the globe of the world is actually faring much better than what economists expected last year, April. In that there have been countries that have managed to sort of table deals with the Americans and leading to lower tariff levels. And how the Americans are actually doing it now is that any country that comes to them and forms a deal with them will have an easier time than the one that comes number second, number third, and number fifth. Those countries like South Africa was actually not even in that queue, will face even harder demands from the US and actually to meet those agreements. But the Americans are still willing to listen to the South Africans. But from the South African side, we continue to take this hostile American view, and that's not a card that I think we should be playing. We should be actually seeing that South Africa definitely has leverage. If you look at the ships that are passing the Western Cape currently, it is almost about double than what you saw in the Red Sea, largely due to what was happening with the Houthi rebels from Yemen firing at global shipping containers passing there. And the Americans see South Africa as a really good entry point to Africa, given that we are fundamentally a democracy and we have really good independent institutions that protect the civil liberties of South Africans. So we have a lot of things to offer the Americans. But in terms of the South African politicians, they don't see those cards and they're actually not playing those cards at all. So trade relations continue to deteriorate between South Africans and Americans at this present moment.
And do you know of any interventions from a GNU perspective? Because there clearly isn't an alignment in terms of the foreign policy in that regard. Have you heard anything around that?
Well, there's a bit of drive from the DA side in terms of actually easing relations with the Americans, but fundamentally, the Americans will listen to a coherent government. And if the view from the ANC currently is that you want to have naval exercises near Simonstown with Iran, as well as what the Americans perceive as national security threat to them and the allies, the Americans will continue to treat South Africa as not an ally and continue to face high tariff levels. So at the present moment, no, there's no coherent message to formulate a deal, a trade and investment deal that sees South Africa's economic prospects fare much better than what it currently is. So I don't see that currently.
So moving now to the municipal elections. I mean, have you done polling recently, and what is that starting to tell us?
Our latest polling is that of the fourth quarter of 2025. We haven't started polling in terms of local polling elections. That will happen throughout the course of this year. But what I can say in our latest polling, what's quite interesting is that if you look at the ANC sits at about 40%, which is largely the moving average of where they've been polling over the past year. The DA's performance as a proportion of registered voters has increased from about 26 to 32%. In fact, If you were to take those two parties currently, they poll about 69% as a proportion of all registered voters in the country. Contrast that with the EFF and MK, those parties sit below 10%. And the reason why this is so popular is that what fundamentally underpins that support is that of the established middle class, which you see in the DA voter base, as well as the aspirant middle class, which you see in the ANC voter base, and that of the GNU being the most popular deal on the table. Be that amongst all registered voters, even that amongst ANC voters, as well as that of DA voters, it remains the most popular deal on the table. But the risk to that coalition is what happens, firstly, is what you mentioned there with the local government elections. And what we're seeing here, if you were to look at the national numbers in 2024, is that the ANC actually no longer has a majority in the three biggest provinces in the country, such as that of Gauteng, KZN, as well as that of Western Cape, that contribute nearly 3/4 of national GDP. In fact, the party that's in the lead in those provinces is the DA. And the ANC in rural parts of the country polls at about 60%, which it fares a lot better in rural areas, but it cannot continue to double down on that support given the fact that immigration trends, the young leave those provinces and the older, unfortunately, dying out in those provinces. So definitely the local government elections will be a test of the GNU, as well as with that, what will happen coming now in May with the DA's leadership conference, in which they will pick who will be the next leader of the DA. Currently, Mr. John Steenhuisen is in favor of remaining within the government of national unity, but if someone were to replace them, they might not be favorable to such a coalition agreement.
But I've said this to you before, our politics is the gift that keeps on giving. And the ANC's done superbly well to give us more than enough to talk about in that respect for a while. But now the DA is starting to also get onto the stage and give us things to skinner about, if I could put it that way. So that there's also internal politics that's taking place within the DA. How might that affect both the run-up to the leadership, as well as how the voter views the DA, who's always sort of come across as being everything's all organized and everyone's on the same page?
I definitely think that is a headwind that needs to be monitored, but something that I think would also be valuable to your listeners and viewers is actually, if you look at it right now, although Jim Steenhuisen is facing many knives from publications in the country, as well as that of his own party, he sits at a party right now that's polling at the highest it's ever been. South Africa has been moved from grey listing, as well as that we have a new inflation target, and we're faring about 50% better than what we were performing in 2024. And all these markers is actually under that of John Steenhuisen. And of course, there's serious issues that he needs to address, such as that of the foot and mouth disease that's affecting many farmers in the country. It's a serious issue, and that's a serious concern. But what people should be looking at here is that South Africans actually like this government of national unity, and it's actually led support to that of the DA. And given what may happen in April, these internal conflicts that you see here, it's all a contest in order to elect another leader of the DA. And I think that should definitely be monitored. And should that be successful in terms of what you're seeing in the media, the dirt digging happening in the media, to remove Mr. John Steenhuisen, I think we should be looking as to who that next leader of the DA would be, and if they would fare better, or if they would like to be in a coalition agreement with the ANC, which I think would be the best option for them.
Yeah, I think it's
as well as that for the country as well.
But what we've also noticed over the last while is more prominent DA leadership coming through the ranks as a result of the GNU because of ministerial appointments and so on. So the depth has started to become more apparent from what I see. What I wanted to check with you, I always get confused. John Steenhuisen is the leader of the party.
Yes.
Helen Zille is the chair of the executive
Yes.
Federal Council or whatever.
Federal Council, exactly.
Who's the boss?
Well, if you ask people, if you ask the DA, it's definitely John, but ordinary people on the street would say it's Helen Zille that is seen as the leader of the party. But I think that John Steenhuisen also has leadership quality within that of the DA. And how it works is that executive board will elect the new leader. And currently, at the moment, there's some internal issues happening with the DA, and there's a question mark surrounding Mr. John Steenhuisen. But I think we actually have a lot of positive points under his leadership of the DA quite recently, and him actually working with the ANC, which is a very important thing. This coalition agreement here, the alternative of which is that of the ANC, MK, or EFF, or even that, like what this is the way in which politicians are actually finding ways to work together and address political differences. The alternative of that is anarchy and violence, which is what South Africans definitely do not want. This is actually what we experienced in coming towards South Africa's democracy in the 1990s.
So I agree with that, but also yes and no, because there are some fundamental issues, like we've just discussed around the foreign policy, it's critically important that they're not getting aligned on, not addressing, and therefore that's impacting the man in the street. And that's a massive pity.
Yes, it is. It is a massive pity. And I think when you look at this GNU, when talking about the man on the street, particularly that of the DA as well, that's gained a lot of support, is that what fundamentally anchors this government of national unity. And I think that's also what the reason behind some of the leaders within the DA that want to exit it is that it's fundamentally underpinned by the material circumstances of South Africans. If those circumstances continue the trend that we've seen over the past 17 years, it will weaken the support of the GNU as well as that of the DA. And that's a risk that some officials within the DA are also seeing, is that they're actually not able to push some of the policies that they wish, that they believe would lead to South Africa actually being a prosperous and successful economy. However, I think also what the DA needs to also understand here is that this is the most popular deal on the table. If you exit the government of national unity, you also face the risk of losing that support. And I'm not saying that they can do whatever they wish, but they lose some of the power that which they had at actually having political power. Last year was the first time the DA had political power when it actually contested against an ANC that wanted to hike that VAT by 2%. And the consequence of that, the DA subsequently reaped quite a lot of support. So they also need to be looking and thinking, what does that exactly mean if they exit the government of national unity?
So that's the DA. The ANC is going into their own power struggle over the next while around leadership, future leadership. And you've always mentioned that President Ramaphosa polls as the most popular leader
Yes.
within the party. So with his, call it, exiting at some point in time, and we yet to see a president see his tenure all the way through within the ANC. Where do you think that goes, and who's looking most likely at the moment? Do you have a feel for that? And if President Ramaphosa goes earlier, do you think that weakens the ANC further, or is it just a little bit too far out that?
At the moment, from our polls, ANC voters are actually in favor of Cyril Ramaphosa running for a third term within being the leader of the ANC. He can do that, go for a third term being the leader of the party. But he can't serve another term being the president of the country, given that there's a constitutional limit on leadership in South Africa. So he remains the most popular individual. And in terms of who replaces him, there's still a question mark, and we're not sure at this moment. But I do believe that once we start polling this year, coming towards 2027, we'll start to have an idea as to who might that individual be to replace Mr. Ramaphosa. At this moment, he still remains the most popular figure. And we do see that him staying until December 2027. But we're going to continue to monitor that and update viewers and clients through the Common Sense or through our briefings.
I find it interesting. There's a lot of the commentary that I see lately is quite negative towards President Ramaphosa and his tenure as president, yet he still remains the most popular. Now, I don't know if those two are correlated in some way or whether it's a choice issue that's the voters seeing.
Well, when I started my analytical career, he was polling at about 80% at that point. He's currently polling almost neck and neck with the ANC, roughly about 40%. So definitely his support has waned. It's about half of what it was during that period. And I think the reason behind that is that this is a man that actually leads a party that has an executive board like any other business. But this executive board has about 80 members. They call the NEC, the National Executive Committee of the ANC, and 20 hung seats. And these individuals come across all specs of life, from high levels of criminality, high levels of corruption. some of which actually understand and want to pivot to a better South Africa, others which have an invested interest in actually being the fangs on the public fiscus and draining the public fiscus. So you essentially have a party that can't move on firmly on economic policy, and you have a chairman that wants to lead that executive board through consensus, not actually taking executive decisions. So he's stuck, and the party is stuck. And the consequence of that is that he's seen his support levels decline to the lowest it's ever been, including that of his own, where he was actually at one point in time, his popularity was almost double that of the ANC. So that definitely also knocks him, but at the current stage, he still remains that of the popular figure, given that the caliber as well, the person next to him, their popularity figures are nowhere near where he is.
Yeah. So before I let you go, I question in my own head in trying to form an opinion, this new world order, with actions being taken by the US and the likes of Venezuela, the threats towards Greenland, which I just see as being negotiation tactics, but even still, just that tactic is quite different. And I say to myself, I'm no big Trump fan, but it's action that's been taken. So there's actual steps that are being taken to move things to a certain place rather than a lot of nothing, if I could put it that way. So what is your view on what's happening within the world now with the US putting its foot down, doing things like that, and how the rest of the world will react?
I think the fundamental thesis driving American foreign policy is actually peace through strength. If you actually take Trump seriously, not literally in terms of his public comments on Truth Social or his public addresses, and you actually see his foreign policy objectives, one of which was that of peace in the Middle East, telling Iran we do not want you to have a nuclear arm and stop threatening Israel, or else we'll have issues with you. And that's exactly what happened last year when they bombed the nuclear facility, the nuclear enrichment facility in Iran. And now it looks like the end of war in Gaza, and what's happening in Iran now is that what we're seeing in the Middle East is actually much better than what it was last year. And you also look at Venezuela, in which he told Mr. Maduro that we actually don't want your drugs being shipped into America, and stop having close relations with that of Iran and that of Cuba. We see that as a national security threat, and if you don't do so, we'll have to take punitive measures in order to address that. And that's exactly what happened. If you take those comments seriously, you actually look at his foreign policy objectives, including that of Greenland, it's actually that of the US maintaining dominance of that of the Atlantic Ocean, as well as that of the backdoor to the Atlantic Ocean, which is the Indo-Pacific, where South Africa plays a huge, important role if you look at Simonstown.
I was just about to say, we the Greenland of the South.
Yeah, exactly. And this is a very important point that the South African politicians should also play. I think what the South African officials are seeing is that we are currently in a multipolar world from a unipolar world where the US was a global dominance in foreign policy, but now we have other parties such as that of China and Russia, and we can afford to entertain those individuals. Well, that's a question mark if we can afford to entertain those particular individuals, but what we're currently seeing is the missed opportunities that South Africa could gain from particular trade agreements with Americans. And we are a sovereign country. We can make trade agreements with whoever we want to. But the way in which the government has taken their foreign policy position has been losing position after losing position after losing position, including that of the recent what we've been doing now with Iran, with the new having them train near Simonstown. And that's a very important point that the South African government needs to consider, is that the Americans look very strong if you look at their track record over the past 2 years. And it's important for us to also consider how we play our cards.
Bheki, it's always fascinating talking to you. We appreciate you. Quick shout out to the Common Sense, still going well, growing its following.
Yeah, still growing the Common Sense. Please do follow us on Instagram, Twitter, as well as that of our YouTube page. In fact, we talked a little bit here about Mr. John Steenhuisen. My colleague, Gabriel Macon, did an excellent interview of John Steenhuisen, and that's available on our YouTube channel out today, as well as check out our website, thecommonsense.co.za, where we publish fresh data as well as strategic analysis. And it's still growing. It's actually good to be here and to contribute to such a good platform.
Definitely the best place these days now to get our local news and global news at the end of the day. So congrats. I think you guys are doing a great job, and we'll put a link in the subscription to this video.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me on, Leon.
Bheki, all the best, and we will see you again. Keep well.
See you again. Keep well. Ciao.